Angeline, Eveline, and Zerline were three sisters who never saw eye to eye. They argued about everything: clothes, music, chores, even who got the last slice of cake. Their mother, Mrs. George, was deeply worried. She had always wished for her daughters to share the strong bond that sisters usually had, but they were too caught up in their fights to realize the importance of family. A journey to Congo one day, the sisters received an invitation from their father, Mr. George, who lived in Congo, Africa. He wanted them to visit him for the holidays. Mrs. George, however, had an important office conference and couldn't travel with them. For the first time, the three sisters had to travel together without their mother's guidance. At first, they weren't thrilled about it. Angeline, the eldest at 16, believed she should be in charge, which irritated Eveline, who was 14 and hated being bossed around. Zerline, the youngest at 10, felt ignored as usual. Yet, they knew they had no choice but to travel together. The airport struggles. As soon as they arrived at the airport, their problems began. The signs and announcements were mostly in French, a language they didn't understand. They struggled with check-in, security checks, and finding their gate. At one point, they stood confused in front of a sign, trying to figure out where to go. Angeline sighed. "I told you we should have studied some French before coming." Eveline rolled her eyes. "Well, it's too late for that now, isn't it?" Meanwhile, Zerline, who had been watching a group of passengers speaking French, tugged on her sister's sleeves. "Maybe we should ask someone for help." For once, they listened to their youngest sister. They approached an airport staff member and tried their best to communicate with gestures and the few French words they knew. After a lot of pointing, nodding, and broken phrases, they finally found their way. As they sat down at their gate, they looked at each other and burst into laughter. It had been chaotic, but somehow they had managed. A newfound bond. During the long flight, they reminisced about their childhood, played card games, and even helped Zerline with a crossword puzzle. By the time they landed in Congo, they realized something had changed. They were still different, still stubborn, but for the first time, they had truly worked together. When they met their father at the airport, they ran to him, excited to share their adventure. The trip that was supposed to be a challenge had brought them closer. From that day on, they still had their disagreements, but they knew they were stronger together. Mrs. George was surprised when she received their call. Instead of the usual complaints about each other, she heard them laughing and telling stories together. She smiled. Perhaps, just perhaps, her daughters had finally understood what being sisters truly meant.